Before we learn how to search, we're first going to learn how to read in information from a file, because there is no way I or you want to sit here and type in a whole bunch of information every time we want to search. Reading from a file is pretty darn easy, and the first thing that we need to do is get a file in order to read from it. And I am going to take a file out of chapter 16. This file is going to be a list of supervillains so that I, as a superhero, can quickly sort through this list and find my arch nemesis. In chapter 16 up here, I've got a list of supervillains. I'm going to right-click on this list of supervillains and do Save Link As. Depending upon the browser that you're using, you might end up with something slightly different, but you should be able to figure it out. I'm going to flip up here to the desktop to save this file, and I'm going to go ahead and save supervillains. And there we go, I've saved supervillains to the desktop. Now at this point I can go ahead and close that out. I don't need it anymore. And I've got my Wing IDE set up here so that I can create a Python program in order to read in a file. Now the first order of business is to create a variable that's going to represent the file. I'm going to call this variable file. I could call it something else, doesn't really matter, but file seems to work fairly well. Then I need to call a new function called open. The open function opens a file so that I can read from it, and all I need to do is pass in the name of the file that I want to read. There is a little bit of a trick to it. This file right here needs to be in the same directory as my Python file. It will not look anywhere else. In this case, my Python file is in users, paul.craven, desktop, search.py, the same exact place that I saved the supervillain file. Then just opening the file, of course, doesn't read from it. What I need is, because there's quite a few different lines in this supervillain file, in fact, I can take a look at it here. The supervillain.txt file has about 100 different names that are generated of different supervillains. I want to read this, and if I want to read several things, I don't want 100 lines of code in here. In fact, I'm not even really sure how many lines are going to be in this file. In order to do this type of loop, I'm going to create a for loop, and this is a really easy for loop to create. Whatever variable I create and open the file, that file variable is going to point to supervillains.txt. If I take that and put it here, Python will treat it as a list. And really it is. It's a list of different supervillains, and each individual line is automatically going to be taken as a particular list item, which is really convenient. Therefore, all I need to do in order to loop through this is do a for loop. It's going to look at this as a list of lines, and it's going to put each line into this variable right here. Therefore, the first time through this loop, I'm going to read Adolphus of Hellborn. Then the next time through, that variable line will equal this. Then the next time through, the variable equal this. Then the next time through, the variable equals through this. And we're going to run this loop 100 times, once for each name. And that variable line is going to equal each one of those names in turn as I read through this particular file. Okay, that seems straightforward. Let's go ahead and give it a try. One of the easiest things that I can do to make sure that this is working the way I expect it to is do print line. Okay, I go ahead and run this. And when I run this, I get an error. I look at this, and then I can see that, in fact, I have not correctly spelled villains, and therefore didn't find the file. And I actually get that error down here, where it says no such file or directory, supervillains.txt. Looks like I need to go back to school for my spelling. Anyway, not a problem. I'm going to go here, change that. It's an A and then an I. And now hopefully I've spelled supervillains correctly. I'm going to hit stop and then run here again. And excellent. My supervillains have displayed down here in the output, and I've successfully read in each individual item. But Unfortunately, there are two things that I still need to do. It's not quite as simple as these 3 lines of code that I've got on the screen. And the first one, if you take a look at the names that are being printed out, you'll see that I've got a name right here, and then I've got a blank line, and then I've got a name, and then a blank line, and then a name. Really, if I was reading in a line each individual time, I would expect this to print out each name on each line without the blank line in between. Where does the blank line come from? The issue is that when you read in a name or a line, not only does it read in that line, the text, but it also reads in a /n/r, carriage return line feed. And that carriage return line feed exists as part of the string. This will make it difficult because if you compare this line right here and you ask it later on in like an if statement or something, not a for loop, but if you did it in an if statement and asked it if it was Adolphus, and then finish out the rest of the string, the computer will tell you no, because it's not Adolphus of Helborn, it's Adolphus of Helborn with a carriage return line feed, which is totally different to the computer. Well, this is just confusing. We don't want the carriage return line feed on there. Somehow we want to get that off. Well, that's not a problem. All we need to do is the following. We're going to take our line variable and then we're going to strip. Oh, that's not what you were expecting? Okay, we're going to call the strip command, and what the strip command does is it goes and looks at the line of text that we've got in here, and if there are any extra spaces or carriage returns or line feeds or tabs either before here or after it, it won't strip anything in the middle, but either before or after it, it will strip those off. I can run the line strip command like I am right now, and it may seem like I've got the right command, but I won't find those items to be stripped off. I can escape from here, I can run this, and despite your professor's best assurances that the strip command would strip this carriage return line feed off, it hasn't happened. Well, the reason is, this is kind of like saying x plus 1. We know x plus 1 does add 1 to x, but it doesn't go back and change the original value of x, right? What I need is x equals x plus 1, and that's the same philosophy of this line. I need line equals line.strip. Line.strip will take off all the carriage return line feeds of that line, but it won't change the original line. I need to do line equals that stripped line. Now when I run it, excellent. I've got all my supervillains printed out without that extra carriage return line feed, and later when I go to search for them, I don't have to worry about that extra carriage return line feed being at the end of the string. We're a lot farther along with this program, but your mother wouldn't like this program at all because what you've done is something terrible in computerdom, and that is I have opened supervillain's file, but I have not closed it. Basically, it's like I had a cabinet and I went around, I wanted to get a dish out of the cabinet, I open up the cabinet, pull out the dish, and just leave it there. Well, that's really irritating for people. It's like leaving the toilet seat lit up. It's not the end of the world, and in fact, a lot of people don't even notice. But if you leave a file open, and then somebody later goes to try to delete the file, and they can't because you've got that file left open, nobody else can work with it, it's not a great idea to leave a file open. When you're done reading a file, you should always close the file. When you close the file, then somebody else can use it and those resources are released. A lot of programs, if you forget to close a file, you won't even notice because when your program is done, the operating system kind of acts as the mother and goes around and picks up after you and closes the files. But it's a bad habit to get into, especially if you ever write a program that runs for a long time. We don't want to start a bad habit at this point in time. We want to be the proper programmer. How do we close the file? All I need to do down here is take the file variable, and that file variable has a function called close, and I'm going to do file.close, and that's it. Now, anybody else, once I've closed that file, can come back and use it. I can't read from that file after I've closed it. The file's closed, I'm good to go, and I've done proper programming by releasing those resources. This is now a program that your mother would be proud of. I need to do something more with this list of villains than just print it out. I want to be able to add it to a list in Python so that I can do processing and searching later on. How do I add it to a list? Well, it works just like the pattern that we've already done for adding items to a list. I first off need to create an empty list. Pretty easy. And then rather than printing out the item, I'm going to name list.append that individual line. Just to check it out to see if it works, I'm going to print the name list. Let's see if we have got it working. Yep, there we go. I can see down printed out here, it's got the entire list of 100 items all added into that particular name list. If you want to add a bunch of items to a list, remember you start off with an empty list, and then inside of a loop you just append each individual item you want to the list, and you've got it. Really easy and straightforward.